The moment Clara Morton stepped off the train in Red Creek, Wyoming, she knew her life was about to shatter. The man who'd promised to marry her, sight unseen, took one look at her crooked shoulder and wire-rimmed spectacles, and his face twisted with disgust. "You're not what I ordered," Alden Pike announced loud enough for the entire platform to hear. "I'll buy you a ticket back east." Just like that, Clara became the town's newest spectacle. The mail-order bride nobody wanted, abandoned, humiliated, alone. But what happened next would change everything, because a rugged cowboy was watching, and he had very different plans. Before we dive into Clara's journey, I want you to stay until the very end to see how this incredible story unfolds. And please, comment below with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far Clara's story has traveled across the world. Now, let's begin. The Wyoming wind cut through Clara Morton's threadbare traveling coat like 1,000 tiny knives, each gust reminding her just how far she'd come from the relative shelter of Boston's crowded streets. She stood on the weathered wooden platform of Red Creek Station, her gloved hands clasped tightly around the worn handle of her carpet bag, trying desperately to maintain the composure her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "A lady never shows weakness in public, Clara." Never. But maintaining composure was becoming increasingly difficult as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and the man who was supposed to be her future husband hadn't even bothered to introduce himself properly before destroying every hope she'd carried across a continent. The train that had brought her here, after 3 grueling days of coal smoke, hard benches, and suspicious glances from other passengers, was already pulling away from the station with a mournful whistle that seemed to echo Clara's own despair. Its departure felt final, like watching the last bridge to her old life burn behind her. Not that her old life had been worth preserving. "Miss Morton, is it?" The voice had been cold, clipped, utterly devoid of warmth. Clara had turned, hope fluttering weakly in her chest like a bird with a broken wing, to find a tall man in an expensive suit studying her with the kind of expression one might reserve for a horse that had turned up lame at auction. His eyes, a pale watery blue, had traveled from her face down to her shoulders, where her left side sat slightly lower than her right, the result of a childhood illness that had twisted her spine just enough to be noticeable. Those eyes had stopped there, narrowing with unmistakable disappointment. "I'm Clara Morton, yes," she'd replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You must be Mr. Pike. I'm so pleased to finally You didn't mention a deformity in your letters." Alden Pike's words cut through her greeting like a butcher's knife through meat, sharp, efficient, brutal. The platform hadn't been crowded, but it hadn't been empty either. A handful of travelers waiting for the eastbound train, a family loading supplies onto a wagon, the station master organizing cargo, all of them within earshot, all of them now pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Clara's cheeks had flushed hot despite the autumn chill. I didn't think it was significant. It doesn't affect my ability to—" "And spectacles." Pike continued his inventory of her flaws as if she hadn't spoken. "Weak eyes. That's hereditary, isn't it? Mr. Pike, perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private." Clara had tried to salvage what remained of her dignity, glancing at the growing audience their conversation was attracting. "There's nothing to discuss, Miss Morton." Pike's voice grew louder, as if he wanted witnesses to what came next. "I placed an advertisement for a wife, a healthy, attractive wife who could bear strong children and represent my standing in this community properly. You misrepresented yourself in your correspondence." "I did no such thing." Clara's composure finally cracked. "I told you I was plain, that I was educated but not wealthy, that I had no family and no prospects in Boston. I answered your advertisement honestly, Mr. Pike. Every word I wrote was true." "You didn't mention being crippled." The word landed like a physical blow. Clara actually took a step backward, nearly stumbling over her own trunk, the battered leather case that contained everything she owned in the world. 23 years of life reduced to one trunk and a carpet bag. "I am not crippled," she said quietly, fighting the burning sensation behind her eyes that warned of approaching tears. "My shoulder is slightly elevated. It causes me no pain and no limitation. I can work as hard as any woman, harder even, because I've had to." But Alden Pike had already lost interest in the conversation. He pulled a leather wallet from his jacket pocket, and extracted several bills with the casual indifference of a man for whom money was no object. The next eastbound train leaves in 3 days. This should be sufficient for a ticket back to Boston and lodging until then. There's a boarding house 2 streets over, Mrs. Henderson's place. She's expensive, but respectable. He held out the money, waiting for Clara to take it like one might wait for a dog to accept a treat. Clara stared at the bills, then at Pike's face, then back at the money. 3 days ago, she would have been grateful for such an amount. 3 days ago, she'd left Boston with barely enough money for food during the journey, trusting that the man who'd written her such elegant letters about building a life together in the West would be waiting with open arms. Those letters were folded carefully in her carpet bag now, tied with a ribbon she'd saved from a hat she'd sold to afford her train ticket. She'd read them so many times during the journey that she'd memorized whole passages. I seek not mere beauty, but a true partner of mind and spirit, a woman of character who understands that the West rewards courage, not pedigree. Apparently the West also rewarded perfect posture and excellent eyesight. I can't go back to Boston, Clara heard herself say, though she hadn't intended to speak the words aloud. Pike's eyebrows rose slightly. Pardon? I have nothing to return to. I used the last of my savings for this journey. The house I lived in was sold to pay my mother's debts after she died. I gave up my position, not that it paid enough to live on anyway. There is nothing for me in Boston, Mr. Pike. That's why I answered your advertisement in the first place. She hated the pleading note that had crept into her voice, hated even more the glimmer of satisfaction that appeared in Pike's eyes at her admission of complete dependence. That's hardly my concern, Miss Morton. His tone suggested the matter was closed. You should have considered your circumstances more carefully before embarking on such a journey under false pretenses. False pretenses? Clara's desperation was giving way to anger now, hot and sharp and clarifying. You wrote that you valued honesty and character above all things. You said you wanted a partner, not a decoration. You said, I said many things, Pike interrupted smoothly, as did you. Apparently we were both disappointed by reality. The difference is, I have the means to remedy my disappointment. Here. He thrust the money toward her again, more insistently. Take it. I'm being generous, which is more than you deserve after wasting my time. The station master was openly watching now, not even pretending to work. The family by the wagon had stopped loading supplies. Even the wind seemed to have paused, waiting to see what this strange Eastern girl would do. Clara looked at Alden Pike, really looked at him, and realized with sudden crystal clarity that she had dodged a bullet. This man with his perfect suit and his cruel eyes and his obsession with appearances would have made her utterly miserable. Better to be abandoned on a train platform in Wyoming than to spend a lifetime being reminded of every way she failed to meet his standards. Keep your money, Mr. Pike. Clara straightened her spine, ignoring the way it made her uneven shoulders more noticeable. I wouldn't want to further waste your time, and frankly, you've wasted quite enough of mine. She turned away from him, away from the money, away from the future she'd imagined during those long train rides west. Her trunk sat where the porter had left it, next to a bench at the far end of the platform. She walked toward it with her head high and her carpet bag clutched against her chest like armor. Behind her, she heard Pike make a sound of disgust. Ungrateful woman! Don't come crying to me when you're sleeping in the street. Clara didn't respond. She reached her trunk and sat down on the bench beside it, finally allowing herself to look around at the town that was supposed to have been her new home. Red Creek, Wyoming, wasn't much to look at. The train station sat at the edge of what passed for the main street, a wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings that all seemed to lean slightly, as if exhausted by the constant wind. She could see a general store, a saloon, what might have been a church steeple in the distance, and dozens of smaller structures she couldn't identify from this angle. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow that would soon spread down to the valley. The sky was enormous out here, bigger than any sky she'd seen in Boston, so vast and blue it almost hurt to look at. The air smelled different too, clean and sharp, carrying scents of pine and sage, and something else she couldn't name. It might have been beautiful if she hadn't been completely alone and terrified. The other people on the platform were dispersing now that the show was over. The family with the wagon climbed aboard and drove off. The travelers waiting for the eastbound train, still 2 hours away, according to the schedule board, retreated into the station's small waiting room. The station master disappeared into his office, though Clara could see him peering out the window at her occasionally. Only she remained outside, sitting on a bench next to a trunk that suddenly felt like a millstone around her neck. What was she supposed to do now? Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Pike had mentioned it. Perhaps she could find work there. Cleaning rooms, washing linens, cooking meals. She had experience with all of those things. Her mother's illness had lasted 2 years, during which Clara had learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed and make meals from ingredients other people would have thrown away. But boarding house jobs typically provided room and board in exchange for work, not wages. And Clara needed wages. She needed money for food, for shelter, for eventual passage to somewhere, anywhere. Maybe California. She'd heard there were opportunities in California. The sun was beginning its descent toward those distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that would have been lovely if Clara had been in any state to appreciate beauty. She'd been traveling for 3 days and sitting on this bench for nearly an hour, and the exhaustion was finally catching up with her. She slumped slightly, letting her carefully maintained posture slip for the first time since stepping off the train. What did it matter now who saw her uneven shoulders? The man who'd cared about such things had already rejected her in the most public way possible. "You planning to spend the night out here?" The voice startled Clara badly enough that she actually jumped, her hand flying to her throat. She turned to find a woman standing a few feet away, maybe 40 years old, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm not certain of my plans yet," Clara managed. The woman snorted. "I'm Sadie Chen. I run the general store." She jerked her head toward one of the buildings Clara had noticed earlier. "Saw what happened with Pike. Whole town saw it, probably. News travels fast here." Clara's cheeks burned again. "I'm sure it does." "You really have nowhere to go?" There seemed little point in lying. "No, I used everything I had to get here." Sadie studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I might have some work, if you're willing. My clerk just left to get married. Actually, married, not mail order abandoned." The hint of sympathy in her voice made Clara's throat tighten. "Can't pay much, but it includes a room above the store and 2 meals a day." Hope sparked in Clara's chest, painful and bright. "I'd be very grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Chen." "It's Miss Chen," Sadie corrected. "And I'll be grateful if you can actually do the work. Last girl I hired couldn't count change to save her life. You educated?" "Yes, ma'am. I attended school through age 16, and I've been keeping books for a seamstress in Boston for the past several years." "Can you lift heavy things? Bags of flour? Crates of canned goods?" Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My shoulder doesn't affect my strength, Miss Chen. I'm smaller than some, but I'm stronger than I look. I've been taking care of myself and my mother for quite some time." Sadie's expression softened slightly. "Your mother passed?" "6 months ago." "And you've been alone since then?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Well then," Sadie made a decision, visible in the way her shoulders squared. "Let's get that trunk of yours to the store. You can start tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock sharp. I'll show you how I like things done." Clara stood so quickly she nearly tripped over her own feet. "Thank you, Miss Chen. You won't regret this, I promise." "We'll see about that." But Sadie's tone wasn't unkind. "Come on, before it gets dark. I'll help you carry—" "That won't be necessary, Sadie." A man's voice, deep and rough around the edges, came from Clara's other side. "I'll handle the trunk." Clara turned to find herself looking up, quite far up, at one of the tallest men she'd ever seen. He had to be at least 6'2", with broad shoulders that seemed even broader in his worn leather coat. His hair was dark brown, sun-streaked lighter in places, and his face was tanned from hours in the sun. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, warm brown eyes that looked at her with something that might have been kindness or might have been pity. Clara wasn't sure which would be worse. "Elias Turner," Sadie said by way of introduction. "Runs a ranch about 5 miles out. Elias, this is—" She paused, looking at Clara. "Clara Morton," Clara supplied, offering her hand automatically before remembering that Western men might not shake hands with women. But Elias took her hand without hesitation, his grip firm but careful, as if he was aware of his own strength and didn't want to hurt her. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Morton. I apologize that your welcome to Red Creek wasn't what you deserved." His words were kind, but they still made Clara want to crawl into a hole and disappear. He'd witnessed her humiliation too, then. Of course he had. Everyone in town had apparently witnessed it. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Turner," she managed. Elias released her hand and moved past her to the trunk, lifting it with an ease that suggested it weighed no more than a pillow. Clara knew exactly how heavy that trunk was. She'd packed it herself, and it had taken 2 men at the Boston station to load it onto the train. "Sadie's giving her the room above the store," Elias said, as if continuing a conversation. "That's real good of you, Sadie." "It's just business," Sadie replied gruffly. "I need a clerk and she needs work. Nothing charitable about it." But Clara heard the lie in her voice, heard the kindness she was trying to hide behind practicality. These people, these strangers in this strange town, were being kinder to her in her first hour here than Alden Pike had been in 3 months of correspondence. "Well, let's get going before we lose the light entirely," Sadie said. "Elias, you mind carrying that trunk to the store?" "Already planning to," he replied. They set off down the platform stairs and onto the main street, an odd little procession. Sadie led the way, her practical boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Elias followed with Clara's trunk balanced on one shoulder, looking as comfortable as if he were carrying a sack of grain. And Clara brought up the rear, her carpet bag clutched against her chest, trying not to think about how completely her life had changed in the space of a single afternoon. The walk to the general store took less than 5 minutes, during which Clara counted 14 buildings, 7 horses, 2 dogs, and at least a dozen people who stopped what they were doing to stare at her. By tomorrow, everyone in Red Creek would know the full story of the mail-order bride who'd been rejected at the station. The thought made her stomach churn. Sadie's general store was a sturdy wooden building with a false front that made it appear taller than it actually was. The windows on either side of the door were clean, displaying everything from boots to butter churns. A bell above the door chimed when Sadie pushed it open, the sound cheerful and welcoming. Inside, the store was organized chaos. Shelves lined every wall, packed with goods. Barrels of flour and sugar sat on the floor. Spools of fabric in cheerful colors stood in rows on one counter. The smell of coffee beans and leather and something sweetly floral filled the air. "Storerooms in the back, stairs to the rooms are on the right," Sadie said, pointing. "Elias, if you could take that trunk upstairs, second door on the left." "Yes, ma'am." Elias headed for the stairs without hesitation. Sadie turned to Clara. "You look dead on your feet. When's the last time you ate?" Clara tried to remember. "I had some bread this morning, before the train arrived." "That was 8 hours ago." Sadie disappeared through a door behind the counter and returned a moment later with a plate containing thick slices of bread, cheese, and what looked like roasted chicken. "Eat, then I'll show you your room." The kindness was too much. Clara felt tears threatening again and bit the inside of her cheek hard to force them back. "Thank you, Miss Chen, truly." "Eat," Sadie repeated, more gently this time. Clara ate. The food was simple but delicious, and she hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. She was still eating when Elias came back downstairs, his footsteps heavy on the wooden steps. "Trunk's in your room, Miss Morton," he said. "I put it by the window. Figured you'd want the light for unpacking." Clara swallowed her bite of bread. "That was very thoughtful, Mr. Turner. Thank you for your help." "Happy to do it." He paused, then added, "Sadie's a fair boss. You'll do well here." There was something in his tone that made Clara look up, really look at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Concern, maybe, or curiosity. His eyes lingered for just a moment on her uneven shoulders before returning to her face, but unlike Pike's assessment, there was no disgust in his gaze. Just interest. "I certainly hope so," Clara said quietly. Elias nodded once, then turned to Sadie. "I'm heading back to the ranch. You need anything before I go?" "Could use those nails I ordered, if they came in on today's train. I'll check with the station master on my way out. If they're in, I'll bring them by tomorrow when I come for supplies." "Appreciate it." Elias tipped his hat to both women, an old-fashioned gesture that seemed entirely natural coming from him. Ladies, Miss Morton, welcome to Red Creek. I hope you'll find it suits you better than your first impression suggested." Then he was gone, the bell above the door chiming his departure. Clara watched through the window as he walked back toward the station, his long stride eating up the distance with ease. She found herself wondering about him, about what a rancher was doing in town on a weekday afternoon, about why he'd bothered to help a stranger, about the kindness in his eyes that had made her feel, for just a moment, like maybe everything would be all right. "Elias Turner's a good man," Sadie said, as if reading her thoughts. "One of the best around here. Lost his wife about 5 years back, childbirth complications. Baby didn't survive either. He's been running that ranch alone ever since, with just his sister May to help around the house." The information settled over Clara like a blanket. So Elias Turner knew loss too, knew what it was like to have your future ripped away without warning. "That's very sad," Clara said softly. "Life's sad sometimes." Sadie took Clara's empty plate. "But it keeps going anyway. You finish eating?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." "Then let me show you upstairs." The room Sadie led her to was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the main street, a narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a trunk, her trunk, sitting exactly where Elias had placed it to catch the light. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything like what she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train in Boston 3 days ago, full of hope and nervous anticipation. But it was hers. For now, at least, it was hers. "Privy's out back, shared with the saloon next door," Sadie said. "You'll want to go early if you don't want to wait. Water pump's in the yard. I expect you up and ready to work at 5 o'clock sharp. I'll show you what needs doing, and we'll see how you manage." "I won't disappoint you, Miss Chen." Sadie gave her a long look. "See that you don't. I don't have patience for girls who can't pull their weight." But again, Clara heard the softness hidden under the gruff words. Sadie Chen was helping her because she'd seen what happened at the station and felt sorry for her no matter how much she tried to pretend it was just business. After Sadie left, Clara sat down on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs. She'd learned years ago that crying didn't solve anything, but quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto her hands while she processed everything that had happened. She'd traveled across the continent to marry a man who'd rejected her within minutes of meeting her. She'd been humiliated in front of an entire town. She had almost no money, no family, nowhere to go except this tiny room above a general store in Wyoming. But she also had a job. She had a place to sleep. She had 2 strangers who'd shown her more kindness in an afternoon than she'd known in months. And tomorrow morning, when the sun rose over those distant mountains, she'd get up and start building a new life. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd hoped for, but a life nonetheless. Clara stood and went to her trunk, kneeling beside it to unbuckle the leather straps. Inside were her few dresses, all practical, all worn, all carefully mended. Her mother's shawl, the only thing of real value she owned. A daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. The letters from Alden Pike, tied with that salvaged ribbon. She picked up the letters, held them for a moment, then carried them to the window and dropped them into the street below. Let them blow away in the Wyoming wind. She had no use for false promises anymore. As she watched the letters scatter and tumble down the dusty street, she caught sight of a figure on horseback at the far end of town. Even from this distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and easy seat. Elias Turner, heading home to his ranch and his grief and his sister May. He'd called her Miss Morton, not the crippled woman, not the rejected bride. Just Miss Morton. It was such a small thing, really, common courtesy, nothing more. But after the day she'd had, it felt like a gift. Clara turned away from the window and went back to her unpacking. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, 5 o'clock and her first day working for Sadie Chen. She'd survived this. She'd survived her mother's illness and death, survived the loss of her home, survived a 3-day journey across America into unknown territory. She could survive being unwanted in Red Creek, Wyoming. She could survive anything. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. The wind sighed around the building's corners. Horses whinnied in some distant stable. Music and laughter drifted from the saloon next door, not rowdy, just the comfortable sounds of men unwinding after a long day's work. And somewhere out there, 5 miles away on a ranch she'd never seen, Elias Turner was probably doing whatever ranchers did in the evenings. Checking on cattle, maybe. Talking with his sister. Sitting alone with memories of the wife and child he'd lost. Clara didn't know why she kept thinking about him. Maybe because he'd been kind when he didn't have to be. Maybe because he'd looked at her like she was a person, not a disappointment. Or maybe because his eyes had held the same loneliness she saw in her own reflection. She fell asleep still wondering, and dreamed of mountains and wind and a voice saying, "Welcome to Red Creek." The rooster that woke Clara at 4:30 the next morning belonged to someone 3 buildings down, but it might as well have been perched on her windowsill for all the good the distance did her. She jerked awake in the pre-dawn darkness, heart pounding, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room and the absence of Boston's familiar sounds. The rattle of morning carriages, the calls of street vendors, the general hum of a city waking up. Wyoming was quieter, emptier. The silence itself seemed to have weight. Clara fumbled for the matches on the washstand and lit the oil lamp with trembling fingers, then poured water from the pitcher into the basin. The water was cold enough to make her gasp when she splashed it on her face, but it finished the job the rooster had started. She was definitely awake now. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, brown calico that had been mended so many times the fabric was more patch than original material, and twisted her hair into a severe bun that she hoped made her look competent and businesslike. The mirror above the washstand showed her a pale, anxious face with shadows under eyes that looked too large behind her spectacles. "You can do this," she told her reflection firmly. "It's just work. You know how to work." By the time she made her way downstairs, the store was already showing signs of life. Lamplight spilled from beneath the door behind the counter, Sadie's private quarters, Clara assumed. The smell of coffee was strong enough to make her stomach growl. "You're early," Sadie said when Clara knocked tentatively on the door. "That's good. Come in and have some coffee before we start." Sadie's living space was as practical as the woman herself, a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room with what looked like a bedroom partitioned off in the back. Everything was scrupulously clean and organized with military precision. "Sit," Sadie commanded, pouring coffee into a thick ceramic mug. "You take cream? Sugar?" "Black is fine, thank you." Sadie raised an eyebrow. "Girl after my own heart. Most women your age want their coffee more cream than coffee." She set the mug in front of Clara along with a plate of biscuits. "Eat something, can't work on an empty stomach." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the biscuits were surprisingly light and buttery. Clara ate gratefully, feeling the food settle her nervous stomach. "Today I'll show you how I run things," Sadie said, settling into the chair across from Clara with her own coffee. "Inventory system, pricing, which customers can be trusted to pay on credit, and which ones can't. Tomorrow you'll start handling transactions on your own. Questions?" "How many hours will I be working?" "Store opens at 6, closes at 7, except Sundays when we're closed. You'll have an hour for dinner at noon and Sunday afternoons off. Room and board plus $4 a week. Fair?" $4 a week wasn't much. Clara had made 6 in Boston, but with room and board included, it was enough. Enough to save, at least. Enough to build towards something. "Very fair, Miss Chen. Thank you." "Stop thanking me," Sadie said gruffly. "You'll earn every penny, I promise you that. Now finish up. We open in 20 minutes, and I want to show you the stockroom first." The next several hours passed in a blur of information. Sadie showed Clara how she organized the stockroom, dry goods on the left, canned goods in the middle, tools and hardware on the right. She explained her inventory system, which involved a ledger book with columns for item, quantity, price, and date of last restock. She introduced Clara to the regular customers who came in before dawn, ranchers picking up supplies before heading out for the day's work, the blacksmith's wife buying flour, the postmaster collecting his weekly tobacco order. Clara's head spun trying to remember everyone's names and preferences. Mrs. Garrett liked her coffee ground fine. Mr. Henderson always bought 3 pounds of nails on Wednesdays. The Jameson boys, twins who couldn't have been more than 10, came in at 6:30 every morning for penny candy, which they were allowed to charge to their father's account. "You'll learn," Sadie said when Clara apologized for the 3rd time for needing to ask which customer was which. "Takes time, that's all. You're doing fine." By noon, Clara's feet ached from standing on the wooden floor, and her head throbbed from concentration, but she'd successfully completed a dozen transactions without major errors. When Sadie told her to take her dinner break, Clara practically sagged with relief. "There's stew in the pot on my stove," Sadie said. "Help yourself. Be back in an hour." Clara had just finished her bowl of surprisingly good beef stew when the bell above the store's door chimed. She could hear Sadie greeting someone in the front, followed by a deep voice that made Clara's heart do an odd little skip. "Afternoon, Sadie. Brought those nails you were asking about." "Elias! Good timing. I was just about to send someone to check if they'd come in." Clara stood, smoothing her skirts, suddenly self-conscious about her mended dress and flyaway hair. She moved to the doorway between Sadie's quarters and the store proper, intending to slip upstairs to her room unnoticed. But Elias Turner was standing at the counter with a wooden crate in his arms, and he looked up just as Clara appeared. His face broke into a smile that transformed his serious features entirely. "Miss Morton, good to see you again. How's your first day going?" There was genuine interest in his voice, not just polite inquiry. Clara found herself smiling back before she could think better of it. "It's going well, thank you, Mr. Turner. Miss Chen is an excellent teacher." "I am, aren't I?" Sadie said dryly. "Elias, put those nails in the stockroom, would you? Clara, show him where the hardware goes. Might as well start learning the layout." Before Clara could protest that she barely knew the layout herself, Sadie had disappeared into the back, leaving Clara alone with Elias and his crate of nails. "After you," Elias said, nodding toward the stockroom. Clara led the way, acutely aware of his presence behind her. He was so tall that he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. The stockroom suddenly felt much smaller with both of them in it. "Hardware's on the right," Clara said, pointing to the shelves Sadie had shown her that morning. "Top shelf, I think?" "Sounds right." Elias set the crate down and began unpacking boxes of nails, sorting them by size with practiced efficiency. "You settling in all right? Room comfortable?" "Very comfortable, thank you. And thank you again for carrying my trunk yesterday. That was very kind." "Wasn't any trouble." He glanced at her, then away, a slight color rising in his tanned cheeks. I hope you won't judge Red Creek too harshly based on Pike's behavior. Most folks here are decent." Clara felt her own cheeks warm. "I appreciate that, Mr. Turner, and I don't judge the town at all. What happened with Mr. Pike was, well, it's behind me now." "Good." Elias placed the last box of nails on the shelf and turned to face her fully. "Because you deserve better than that. Anyone could see that." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them, with quiet conviction as if it were simply a statement of fact, made Clara's throat tighten. "That's very kind of you to say." "Not kind, just true." He picked up the empty crate. "I should let you get back to work. Sadie runs a tight ship." "That she does." They stood there for a moment, neither quite moving. Clara noticed for the first time that Elias had a small scar above his left eyebrow, a pale line that stood out against his tanned skin. She wondered how he'd gotten it. She wondered a lot of things about Elias Turner, actually, which was ridiculous considering she'd only met him yesterday. "Well," Elias said finally, "I'll see you around, Miss Morton." "Clara," she heard herself say. "You can call me Clara if you'd like." His smile returned, warmer this time. "Only if you'll call me Elias. Mr. Turner makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting in a bank office somewhere." "I can't imagine you in a bank office." "Good instincts." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you decided to stay in Red Creek. I think you'll do well here." Then he was gone, leaving Clara standing alone among the shelves of nails and horseshoes and wondering why her heart was beating so fast over a simple conversation. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, and Clara threw herself into learning, determined to prove that Sadie's faith in her wasn't misplaced. She learned that Mrs. Patterson always bought extra sugar because she made preserves to sell. She learned that the Reverend's wife preferred the brown thread over the white. She learned which children could be trusted to look without touching and which ones needed watching every second. And she learned that news traveled even faster in Red Creek than Sadie had suggested. By 3 o'clock, no fewer than 7 people had found excuses to come into the store and get a look at the mail-order bride Pike sent back. Some were kind, offering sympathetic smiles. Others were merely curious, studying Clara like she was an exhibit at a fair. The worst was Mrs. Pike, Alden's mother, who swept into the store at 4 o'clock with the bearing of a queen and the expression of someone who'd just smelled something rotten. "So you're the girl my son was too generous with," she said without preamble, looking Clara up and down with cold blue eyes. "I told him mail-order brides were a poor idea. Women willing to sell themselves to strangers are rarely quality stock." Clara bit back half a dozen responses, remembering that Sadie depended on customer goodwill. Instead, she said as politely as she could manage, "May I help you find something, Mrs. Pike?" "I'm not here to shop. I'm here to make sure you understand your position. My son has standards. The fact that you failed to meet them is no one's fault but your own." Mrs. Pike's voice carried to every corner of the store, ensuring that the 3 other customers present could hear every word. "I expect you'll be leaving Red Creek soon. We're a respectable community. We don't need your kind causing trouble." "My kind?" Clara's patience snapped. "You mean women who work for their living? Women who don't deceive anyone about who they are or what they have to offer? Yes, Mrs. Pike, I suppose I am that kind of woman." Mrs. Pike's face flushed an ugly purple. "How dare you!" "That's enough, Constance." Sadie's voice cut through the building tension like a knife. She emerged from the stockroom where she'd apparently been listening to the entire exchange. "You're not here to shop, and you're not welcome to harass my employee. Get out." "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Out. And don't come back unless you're actually buying something." For a moment, Clara thought Mrs. Pike might actually explode. But apparently even her sense of superiority had limits when faced with Sadie Chen's iron will. She turned on her heel and stalked out, leaving a wake of offended dignity behind her. The other customers suddenly became very interested in their purchases. Clara stood frozen behind the counter, her hands shaking slightly. "Well," Sadie said into the silence. "That was entertaining. Clara, go measure out 3 yards of that blue calico for Mrs. Henderson, would you?" The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Clara couldn't shake the encounter with Mrs. Pike. It wasn't the insults themselves. She'd endured worse from creditors when her mother was dying. It was the reminder that she was an outsider here, a source of gossip and entertainment, someone to be pitied or scorned but never quite accepted. By the time Sadie locked the door at 7 o'clock, Clara was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "You did good today," Sadie said, counting out the day's receipts. "Real good considering. Don't let Constance Pike get to you. She's a bitter old crow who's been making people miserable for 20 years. "Thank you for defending me." "Wasn't defending you. Was defending basic human decency." Sadie closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "Go on upstairs. You look dead on your feet. Tomorrow will be easier." But tomorrow brought its own challenges, and the day after that, and the day after that. Clara fell into a routine that was both comforting and exhausting. Up at 4:30, coffee with Sadie, store open at 6. A constant stream of customers, some kind, some curious, some openly hostile. An hour for dinner. More customers. Store closing at 7. Dinner with Sadie, then upstairs to her room where she'd fall into bed too tired to think. Sunday afternoons became her refuge. Sadie insisted she take the time off, and Clara used it to explore Red Creek, such as it was. The town was small enough to walk end to end in 20 minutes, but it had a surprising amount of character once she looked beyond the dusty streets. There was the church where Reverend Matthews preached to a congregation of about 40 on Sundays. Claire had attended her first service that week and been greeted with everything from warm welcomes to cold stares. There was the schoolhouse where Miss Alice Brennan taught children ranging from age 5 to 15. There was the blacksmith shop where Mr. Colton pounded metal into horseshoes and wagon wheels. There was the saloon, which Clara gave a wide berth, and the boarding house Mrs. Henderson ran for unmarried men working in town. And everywhere, there were people who knew her story. The rejected bride, the crippled girl, the charity case working in Sadie's store. Clara held her head high and pretended she didn't notice the whispers. 3 weeks into her new life in Red Creek, Clara was restocking shelves on a Wednesday afternoon when the door chimed and a woman's voice called out cheerfully, "Sadie, you here?" "In the back," Sadie called back. "Help yourself to whatever you need, May." The woman who appeared in Clara's aisle was perhaps 35, with warm brown hair twisted into a practical braid and a face that seemed designed for smiling. She wore men's trousers beneath her skirts, a practical choice for ranch work, and carried a basket over one arm. "You must be Clara," she said, extending her free hand. "I'm May Turner, Elias's sister. I've been meaning to come meet you, but we've been up to our necks in work at the ranch." Clara shook her hand, pleased by the firm grip and direct gaze. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Turner." "May, please. Miss Turner makes me sound like a schoolmarm." She laughed. "Elias mentioned you were working here, says you're doing a fine job." "He did?" Clara couldn't quite keep the surprise from her voice. "Oh, yes. He stops in here most weeks, doesn't he? Always comes home talking about how organized the store looks now, how efficiently things run." May's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. "He's quite impressed with you." Clara felt her cheeks warming. "That's very kind of him. I'm just doing my job." May didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. "Listen, I actually came in hoping to find you. I know this is forward, but I wanted to invite you to dinner at the ranch, this Sunday, if you're free." Clara blinked. "Dinner? I know. We hardly know each other. But the thing is, I don't get many chances to talk with other women. The ranch is 5 miles from town, and between the work and the isolation, well, I get lonely sometimes." May's smile turned self-deprecating. "Elias is wonderful, but he's not exactly a sparkling conversationalist, and I'd love to hear about Boston. I've never been east of Kansas." The invitation was so unexpected, so genuinely warm, that Clara found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. "I'd love to come. Thank you." "Wonderful. Elias can pick you up Sunday afternoon, if that works. Say around 2 o'clock. I can walk Pita. It's 5 miles, Clara, and the road's rough. Elias won't mind, I promise. He comes to town anyway on Sundays for the service." Before Clara could protest further, May had swept off to collect her supplies, chattering about how excited she was to have a proper guest. Clara stood among the shelves, feeling slightly dazed. She'd been invited to dinner by people who seemed to actually want her company, not just her story. It was the first time since arriving in Red Creek that she'd felt like maybe, just maybe, she might eventually belong here. Sunday arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Clara spent the morning at church, then the early afternoon in an agony of indecision about what to wear. She owned 4 dresses, all of them worn and mended, none of them suitable for dinner at someone's home. Finally, she settled on her gray wool, the least patched of the lot, and twisted her hair into a softer style than her usual severe bun. She was just pinning her hat in place when she heard the sound of a wagon pulling up outside the store. Elias was waiting by the time she made it downstairs, and the expression on his face when he saw her made all her fussing over her appearance worthwhile. "Clara," he said, then seemed to forget what he'd meant to say next. He cleared his throat. "You look real nice." "Thank you. You didn't have to come all this way just for me. Wasn't any trouble. Besides, May would have had my hide if I let you walk." He offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. "She's been excited all week about having you over." The wagon was well maintained, and the horse pulling it, a sturdy bay mare, looked well cared for. Everything about Elias Turner spoke of quiet competence and attention to detail. "I hope I'm not imposing," Clara said as they set off down the main street. "May was very kind to invite me, but I don't want to intrude on your Sunday." "You're not intruding." Elias guided the mare around a pothole with casual expertise. "May's right. We don't get much company out at the ranch. It'll be good to have someone new at the table." They left town behind, heading west on a road that was barely more than wagon ruts through the grassland. The mountains, Clara had noticed, her first day grew larger as they traveled, their peaks sharp against the blue sky. The land here was different from anything she'd known in Boston, vast and open, with grass stretching to the horizon in every direction. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly. "You think so?" Elias glanced at her with what looked like surprise. "Most women from back east find it too empty, too lonely." "It is lonely," Clara agreed, "but there's something honest about it. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not." Elias was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's a good way to put it. The land out here doesn't lie. It's hard when it needs to be hard, generous when it can be generous, but it's always honest about what it is." They talked as the wagon rolled along, conversation flowing more easily than Clara would have expected. Elias told her about the ranch, 300 acres of grazing land, 100 head of cattle, constant work that changed with the seasons. Clara told him about Boston, about the cramped boarding house where she'd lived, about the endless gray skies and crowded streets. "Don't you miss it?" Elias asked. "No." The answer came without hesitation. "There was nothing for me there. Nothing but memories, anyway, and most of those aren't happy ones." "I'm sorry about your mother. May told you?" "Sadie told May, I think. Small town." He smiled slightly. "Everyone knows everything about everyone eventually." "I've noticed." Clara adjusted her spectacles, which had slipped down her nose. "Does it bother you? The lack of privacy?" "Sometimes, but it has its advantages too. When you need help, folks show up. When there's trouble, the whole town rallies." He paused. "When someone like Pike acts like a jackass, the whole town sees it and makes their own judgments." Clara laughed despite herself. "Is that what happened?" "You're working for Sadie Chen, aren't you? And May invited you to dinner, and Reverend Matthews made a point of welcoming you to the congregation." Elias's voice was warm. "Red Creek's not perfect, but most folks here can recognize quality when they see it, regardless of what Alden Pike thinks." The ranch appeared gradually. First a windmill in the distance, then a barn, then a house that was larger and more solid than Clara had expected. It wasn't fancy, but it was well built, with a wide porch and shutters that looked freshly painted. May burst out of the house before the wagon had fully stopped, wiping her hands on her apron and beaming. "You made it! Come in, come in! Dinner's almost ready." The inside of the house was as well maintained as the outside. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall and a long wooden table dominating the center. Doors led off to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and organized, with small touches that spoke of May's care. Curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on the table, braided rugs on the wooden floor. "Your home is lovely," Clara said sincerely. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's ours." May ushered her to the table. "Sit, sit. Elias, stop hovering and help me bring out the food." Dinner was roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. May was an excellent cook, and the food was delicious, but even better was the conversation. May asked Clara 100 questions about Boston, about the buildings, the fashions, the theaters, the street vendors. Elias listened more than he talked, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often funny. It was, Clara realized with a pang, the most relaxed she'd felt since arriving in Wyoming, maybe the most relaxed she'd felt in years. "More pie?" May asked, already reaching for Clara's plate. "I couldn't possibly, but thank you. Everything was wonderful." "Oh, good, because I was hoping you might stay for a while and keep me company. Elias needs to check on the cattle in the north pasture, and I could use help with some mending. If you don't mind, that is?" Clara glanced at Elias, who was already standing. "I don't mind at all." After Elias left, May brought out a basket of clothes that needed mending and 2 cups of coffee, and they settled into companionable work. May talked about life on the ranch, about the challenges and rewards, about how lonely it could be sometimes. "I love Elias dearly," she said, threading a needle. "But he's not exactly talkative. Some days I go from morning to night barely exchanging a dozen words with another human being. That must be hard." "It is." May looked up from her mending. "That's why I was so glad when you came to town. Another woman, close to my age, educated, working in town where I could actually see you regularly. It felt like a gift." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'm the one who's grateful, May. You and Elias have been so kind to me. You and Sadie, you're the only reason I've survived these past few weeks." "Red Creek can be hard on newcomers," May acknowledged, "especially newcomers who arrive under unusual circumstances." "But you're tougher than you look, Clara Morton. I could see that the first time we met." They sewed in comfortable silence for a while, then May said carefully, "Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Of course." "Do you regret it? Coming west, I mean. Even though things didn't work out with Pike?" Clara thought about it, really thought about it. A month ago, sitting on that train platform in humiliation, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, No, she said slowly. I don't regret it. Pike was a mistake, but coming here wasn't. I have a job I'm good at. I have a place to live. I have... She paused, looking at May. I have friends, I think. Or at least the possibility of friends. That's more than I had in Boston. May's smile was radiant. Good. Because I'd like to be your friend, Clara. A real friend. Not just someone who invites you to dinner once. I'd like that too. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking and mending, and Clara learned more about May's life. She'd come west with Elias and his wife Sarah 10 years ago, looking for a fresh start after their parents died. She'd never married, had come close once, to a man who died in a riding accident before they could make it official. Now she poured her energy into the ranch and into taking care of Elias, who she clearly adored despite his lack of conversational skills. He's a good man, May said, her voice soft. The best I know, but he's been so alone since Sarah died. He works too hard, talks too little, smiles even less. She gave Clara a meaningful look. At least he didn't smile much until recently. Clara felt her cheeks warm. May. I'm not saying anything, May said innocently, just observing. And observing that my brother has mentioned your name an awful lot in the past few weeks, and that he volunteered to drive into town to fetch you without me even asking, and that he's wearing his good shirt today instead of his usual work clothes. May, please. I'm sure Elias was just being kind. He's kind to everyone. He is, May agreed, but there's kind, and then there's going 5 miles out of your way to make sure someone gets to dinner safely. There's kind, and then there's the way he looked at you when you came down those stairs today. Before Clara could respond, before she could even process what May was suggesting, they heard the sound of the wagon outside. Elias was back, and it was time for Clara to return to town. The ride back was quieter than the ride out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossible, too vivid to be real. Clara found herself acutely aware of Elias beside her, of the warmth of his arm almost touching hers, of the way he handled the reins with steady, capable hands. Thank you for today, she said as they neared town. May's wonderful, and dinner was lovely. She liked you, Elias said. Talked my ear off about you after you left the first time. Said you were exactly the kind of person she'd hoped you'd be. What kind is that? Smart, kind, real. He glanced at her. She was right. Clara's heart did that odd skipping thing again. That's very flattering, but you barely know me. I know enough. They were on the main street now, passing darkened buildings. Most of Red Creek was already asleep. I know you came here alone and afraid, but didn't let that stop you. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know Sadie thinks you're the best employee she's ever had. I know you stood up to Constance Pike, even though you're new in town and had everything to lose. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. That's enough to know you're someone worth knowing better. Clara sat very still, afraid that if she moved, the moment would shatter. Elias, I'm not Pike, he said quietly. I don't care about your shoulder or your spectacles or anything else except who you are. And from what I've seen, Clara Morton, you're someone pretty remarkable. Then before she could respond, he climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down. His hands were warm and strong around her waist, and for just a moment they stood there in the darkness, close enough that Clara could see the way his eyes reflected the lamplight from the store window. Good night, Clara, he said softly. Good night, Elias. She watched him drive away until the wagon disappeared into the darkness, her heart racing and her mind whirling. May's words echoed in her head. There's the way he looked at you. Clara had come to Red Creek expecting to marry a man she didn't love and build a life based on practical necessity. Instead, she'd been rejected, humiliated, and left to fend for herself. But standing here in the darkness, still feeling the warmth of Elias's hands at her waist, Clara wondered if maybe, just maybe, her rejection had been the best thing that could have happened. She went inside and climbed the stairs to her small room, but sleep was a long time coming. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elias's face, heard his voice saying, "You're someone pretty remarkable." No one had ever called her remarkable before. Clara fell asleep smiling, unaware that in 5 miles away, Elias Turner was lying awake thinking about the exact same thing. The weeks that followed brought a shift in the rhythm of Clara's life. subtle at first, but growing more pronounced with each passing day. Elias began finding reasons to come to town more frequently, supplies he needed, messages for Sadie, errands that somehow always seemed to require a stop at the general store. Each visit brought conversation that stretched a little longer, smiles that came a little easier, moments that lingered in Clara's memory long after he'd gone. May became a regular visitor too, stopping by on her weekly trips to town for supplies and staying to chat with Clara whenever the store was quiet. She brought news from the ranch, invitations to dinner that Clara accepted eagerly, and a friendship that felt like water to someone dying of thirst. It was May who first mentioned the trouble. Elias didn't want me to say anything, she told Clara one afternoon in late October, keeping her voice low even though they were alone in the store. Sadie had gone to the post office, leaving Clara to mind things. But there's been some odd things happening out at the ranch. Cattle going missing, fence lines cut, supplies disappearing from the barn. Clara's hand stilled on the bolt of fabric she'd been measuring. Missing? You mean stolen? We're not sure. Could be rustlers, could be drifters passing through, could be nothing at all. But May's worried expression suggested she thought it was definitely something. Elias has been riding the property lines every night, checking on the herds. He barely sleeps anymore. Have you reported it to the sheriff? May snorted. Sheriff Dawson is 70 years old and can barely see past his own nose. He promised to look into it, which means exactly nothing. No, Elias is handling it himself, which is what worries me. Why? Because my brother thinks he has to do everything alone. Always has, ever since Sarah died. May's fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt. He won't ask for help. Won't admit when he's in over his head. Just works himself into the ground trying to protect what's his. Clara thought about Elias, his quiet strength, his careful consideration before speaking, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on those broad shoulders. He's lucky to have you looking out for him. I do what I can, but he listens to me about as well as that old mule of ours listens to anyone. May gave Clara a meaningful look. He might listen to you, though. May, I don't think... He cares about you, Clara. Anyone with eyes can see it. The way he looks at you, the way he talks about you when you're not around, the way he suddenly needs to come to town 3 times a week instead of once. May reached across the counter and squeezed Clara's hand. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm just saying, if you were to express concern about him working himself to death, he might actually listen. Before Clara could formulate a response, the bell above the door chimed and Sadie returned, arms full of mail and packages. May gave Clara one last significant look before turning to greet Sadie with forced cheerfulness, leaving Clara's thoughts spinning. Did Elias really care about her the way May suggested? And if he did, what was Clara supposed to do about it? She'd come to Red Creek expecting to enter into a practical marriage arrangement, not to fall for a grieving widower with kind eyes and gentle hands. She'd been here less than 2 months. It was too soon to be feeling things this complicated, too dangerous to let herself hope for something that might not be possible. But hope was a stubborn thing, Clara was discovering. It crept in despite her best efforts to remain sensible and practical. That Sunday, when Elias came to drive her to the ranch for dinner, Clara studied him with new eyes. May was right. He looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of worry and sleepless nights. You look tired, Clara said as they left town behind. Elias glanced at her in surprise. I'm fine. Just been busy with the ranch. May mentioned you've been having some trouble. Cattle going missing? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. May talks too much. May's worried about you, so am I. The admission hung in the air between them. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins even as something shifted in his expression. It's nothing I can't handle, he said finally. I'm sure it's not, but that doesn't mean you should have to handle it alone. Clara adjusted her spectacles, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken. You've been so kind to me since I arrived, Elias, you and May both. If there's anything I can do to help, there's not. His voice was firm, but not unkind. This is ranch business, Clara. It's my responsibility. Fine. Clara heard the edge in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. But someone should point out that working yourself into exhaustion isn't going to help anyone. least of all the ranch you're trying to protect. Elias looked at her again, something like surprise flickering across his tired features. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "You sound like May." May is a very sensible woman. That she is. His smile faded but didn't disappear entirely. "And so are you. I appreciate the concern, Clara, truly. But I've been handling this ranch for a long time. I know what I'm doing." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that knowing what you're doing and taking care of yourself weren't mutually exclusive, but they'd arrived at the ranch and May was already coming out to greet them, and the moment was lost. Dinner was pleasant despite the undercurrent of worry. May had made pot roast with vegetables from her garden, and they ate while May chattered about town gossip, and Clara shared stories from the store. Elias was quieter than usual, but he listened attentively, and several times Clara caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. After dinner, May shooed them both out to the porch while she cleaned up, insisting she didn't need help. Clara found herself sitting on the porch steps beside Elias, watching the sunset over the mountains in a spectacular display of orange and gold. "It's beautiful out here," Clara said softly. "I never get tired of the sunsets." "They're different every night," Elias agreed. "One of the things I love about this place. Nothing stays the same. Always changing, always new." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Elias said, "I'm sorry if I was short with you earlier, about the ranch trouble." "You weren't short. You were just being stubborn." He laughed, a low rumble that Clara felt more than heard. "Fair enough. I suppose I am stubborn. Sarah used to say I was the most stubborn man she'd ever met." It was the first time Elias had mentioned his late wife directly to Clara. She held very still, afraid that if she spoke, he'd stop. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Elias's voice was soft, distant. "Smart, practical, never afraid to tell me when I was being an idiot. We were happy together, the time we had." May said it was 5 years ago. 5 years this past spring seems like yesterday sometimes. Other times it feels like a lifetime ago. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the yard. "I thought I'd never feel anything again after she died. Didn't want to, honestly. Seemed easier to just work and not think too much about anything else." Clara's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "And now?" Elias turned to look at her, his eyes dark in the fading light. "Now, I'm not so sure that's the right way to live. Sometimes things happen that make you reconsider what you thought you knew about yourself." Before Clara could ask what he meant, before she could do anything but sit there with her heart in her throat, May appeared in the doorway. "Getting dark," she announced. "Elias, you should get Clara back to town before it's full night. The road's tricky enough in daylight." The moment shattered, but something remained. A promise of words unspoken, feelings acknowledged but not yet named. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When Elias helped Clara down from the wagon in front of the store, his hands lingered at her waist just a fraction longer than necessary. "Clara," he said, then paused as if searching for words. "I'm glad you're here. In Red Creek, I mean. I'm glad you stayed." "So am I," Clara whispered. She watched him drive away into the darkness, then went inside where Sadie was waiting with knowing eyes and a fresh pot of coffee. "That boy's got it bad," Sadie observed. Clara felt her cheeks flush. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't." Sadie poured 2 cups of coffee and pushed one toward Clara. "Just like you don't know that you light up like a Christmas tree every time he walks through that door." "Sadie, I'm not judging, girl. I'm just observing. And what I'm observing is 2 people who are clearly falling for each other but are too stubborn or too scared to do anything about it." Sadie took a sip of her coffee. "Life's short, Clara. Shorter than you think. If you found something good, you ought to hold on to it." Clara thought about those words that night as she lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle her window. Was she falling for Elias Turner? The answer, she knew, was yes. Had been yes for weeks now, if she was being honest with herself. The question was what to do about it. The next few weeks brought colder weather and a steady increase in the trouble at the Turner Ranch. Clara heard about it from May, who grew increasingly worried as more cattle went missing and equipment turned up damaged or stolen. Elias said little, but the exhaustion on his face spoke volumes. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Wednesday in early November, cold and clear with a moon so bright it cast shadows. Clara had just finished closing up the store and was heading upstairs when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. She turned to see a horse galloping down the main street, riderless, its reins trailing in the dust. Even in the moonlight, Clara recognized the bay mare from the Turner Ranch. Her blood turned to ice. She ran into the street without thinking, reaching for the mare's bridle as the animal slowed, sides heaving. The saddle was empty, but there were dark stains on the leather that looked black in the moonlight. "Sadie!" Clara's voice came out as a scream. "Sadie, something's wrong!" Sadie appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and began shouting for help. Within minutes, half the town had gathered. The blacksmith, the doctor, several ranchers who happened to be in the saloon, even Sheriff Dawson moving as fast as his old legs would carry him. "That's Turner's horse," someone said. "There's blood on the saddle." "Could be the horse is injured." "The blood's too high up. Someone was riding when they got hurt." Clara stood frozen, her hand still on the mare's bridle, while chaos erupted around her. Someone needed to ride out to the ranch. Someone needed to check on Elias. Someone needed to do something because Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the idea that Elias might be hurt or worse. "I'm going." The voice was her own, distant and determined. "I'm going to the ranch." "Miss Clara, you can't ride out there alone at night," the blacksmith started. "Then someone come with me." Clara was already reaching for the mare's reins. "But I'm going. Now." "I'll go." Doc Miller stepped forward, a grizzled man in his 60s with steady hands and a calm demeanor. "Someone saddle my horse. Miss Clara, can you ride?" "I'll learn," Clara said grimly. In the end, 4 of them rode out. Doc Miller, Clara, the blacksmith Tom Colton, and a young rancher named Jake Morrison who knew the Turner property. Clara had never ridden a horse in her life, but fear gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. She clung to the mare's mane and focused on not falling off as they galloped through the darkness toward the ranch. May met them in the yard, a rifle in her hands and terror on her face. "Thank God," she gasped when she saw them. "Elias went out 2 hours ago to check the north pasture. The horse came back without him and I didn't know what to do. I was about to ride for town myself." "We'll find him," Doc Miller said with quiet authority. "Where exactly did he go?" May gave them directions, her voice shaking. Clara wanted to dismount and comfort her, but there wasn't time. Every minute that passed was a minute Elias might be lying hurt somewhere in the darkness. They found him 20 minutes later in a ravine at the edge of the north pasture, and Clara's heart nearly stopped at the sight. He was conscious, but barely, propped against a boulder with blood soaking through his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. His face was gray with pain and his breathing was labored. "About time," he muttered when he saw them. "Thought I might have to walk back." "Don't you dare try to be funny," Clara said, sliding off the horse with more speed than grace and nearly falling in her haste to reach him. "You're hurt. What happened?" "Rustlers, 3 of them." Elias winced as Doc Miller began examining his shoulder. "They were cutting out cattle. I confronted them. One of them had a gun. I wasn't fast enough." "You were shot?" Clara's voice rose an octave. "Just grazed, I think. Knocked me off my horse and I hit my head on the way down." He looked up at Clara, and even in pain there was something soft in his eyes. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous." "You're one to talk about dangerous," Clara shot back. "Your horse came back to town covered in blood. Did you really think I'd just stay there and do nothing? You rode out here? You don't know how to ride." "I learned fast." Clara was crying now, tears streaming down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. "You could have been killed, Elias. You could have died out here alone and we wouldn't have found you until morning. But you did find me." His good hand reached up to touch her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You found me, Clara." Doc Miller cleared his throat pointedly. "Much as I hate to interrupt, we need to get him back to the ranch. That shoulder needs proper cleaning and stitching, and I don't like the look of that head wound. Can you ride, Turner?" "I can ride." But when Elias tried to stand, his legs buckled. Tom Colton and Jake Morrison caught him before he fell. Getting Elias back to the ranch was an exercise in controlled chaos. He kept insisting he was fine while simultaneously struggling to stay conscious. Clara rode beside him the whole way, one hand gripping his belt to steady him in the saddle, terrified he'd fall. May had water boiling and bandages ready by the time they arrived. Doc Miller took over with quiet efficiency, cleaning and stitching the bullet graze while Elias gritted his teeth and refused to make a sound. Clara held his good hand through the whole thing, squeezing tight when she saw pain flicker across his face. "You're lucky," Doc said finally, tying off the last bandage. "Another inch to the left, and that bullet would have hit something important. As it is, you'll be sore for a few weeks, but you'll heal. The head wound's a mild concussion. You'll need rest." "I'll make sure he rests," May said firmly, "even if I have to tie him to the bed." "I need to check on the cattle," Elias started. "The hell you do." May's voice was sharp. "Jake and Tom, can you boys help with the ranch work for a few days? Just until my stubborn brother heals enough to be useful?" "Happy to help, Miss May," Jake said. "We'll round up some of the other ranchers, too. It's about time we dealt with these rustlers properly." "Tomorrow," Doc Miller said. "Tonight, everyone gets some sleep, Elias most of all." It was nearly 2 in the morning by the time everything was settled. Jake and Tom headed back to town, promising to return at first light with reinforcements. Doc Miller took the spare bedroom. May collapsed into a chair by the fire, exhausted, and Clara sat beside Elias's bed, unwilling to leave despite May's gentle suggestions that she should rest. "You should go home," Elias said quietly. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't asleep. "It's late." "I'm not leaving." "Clara, don't argue with me, Elias Turner. You're injured, and I'm staying until I'm sure you're all right." She adjusted the blanket over him with shaking hands. "You scared me half to death tonight." "I'm sorry." He opened his eyes, looking at her in the lamplight. "I didn't mean to scare you." "Well, you did. When I saw your horse come back without you, when I saw the blood," Clara's voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you, and I realized that I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear losing you, Elias." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Elias reached for her hand with his good arm, threading his fingers through hers. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "I've been wanting to tell you for weeks, but I didn't know how. Didn't know if it was too soon or if you'd want to hear it." "Tell me now." "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out rough, almost painful, as if they'd been locked inside for too long. "I know it's only been a couple months. I know you came here expecting something different. I know I'm a widower with a failing ranch and more baggage than any woman should have to deal with. But I can't help it, Clara. I look at you and I see everything I didn't know I was still capable of feeling." Clara's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Elias, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I just needed you to know, especially after tonight, after I realized I might not get another chance to tell you. You deserve to know that you're remarkable, Clara Morton. You're brave and strong and kind, and you make me want to be a better man. You make me want to hope again." "Stop talking," Clara said softly. "Clara, stop talking and listen to me." She leaned closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face, careful of his injuries. "I'm falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks. Maybe since that first day when you lifted my trunk and called me your wife to save my dignity. Maybe since you looked at me and saw who I really was instead of just what was wrong with me." Elias's eyes widened. "You are?" "I am." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. Happy tears, hopeful tears. "I came to Red Creek expecting to marry a man I didn't love and build a practical life based on mutual convenience. Instead, I found you, and you're nothing like what I expected, Elias. You're so much better." "Clara." Her name was a prayer on his lips. He pulled her closer with his good arm until their foreheads were touching. "I don't deserve you. That's not for you to decide." Clara smiled through her tears. "Besides, I think we've both spent enough time thinking about what we deserve. Maybe it's time to think about what we want instead." "What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. "I want you," Clara whispered. "I want this. I want whatever future we can build together, if you'll have me." Elias's answer was to kiss her, gentle and careful despite his injuries, a kiss that tasted like hope and promise, and new beginnings. Clara melted into it, her hand curling into his shirt, her heart singing with a joy she'd never thought she'd feel. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "So what happens now?" Clara asked. "Now you let me rest like Doc ordered," Elias said with a soft laugh. "And tomorrow, when I'm thinking more clearly and not dizzy from blood loss, I'm going to court you properly. I'm going to do this right, Clara. You deserve that. You were shot tonight. All the more reason to do things properly. I want to give you everything you should have had in the first place. Courting and romance and a proposal that doesn't happen while I'm bleeding all over May's clean floors." Clara laughed, the sound bright and clear in the quiet room. "You're impossible." "I'm in love with you," Elias corrected. "There's a difference." From the other room, May's voice called out, "If you two are done confessing your feelings, some of us are trying to sleep." Both Clara and Elias dissolved into laughter, the sound mingling together in the darkness like music. Clara stayed by Elias's bedside until dawn, watching him sleep, her hand still tangled with his. The rustlers were still out there. The ranch still had problems. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time since arriving in Red Creek, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the harsh reality of what had happened. Clara woke still sitting in the chair beside Elias's bed, her neck stiff and her hand numb from where he'd held it all night. The first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the windows gold when May appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "You stayed all night," May observed, handing Clara one of the cups. "I couldn't leave him." Clara took a grateful sip of the strong, hot coffee. "Is that wrong?" "It's the most right thing I've seen in years." May settled into a chair on the other side of the bed, studying her brother's sleeping face. "He looks peaceful. I haven't seen him look peaceful in a very long time." They sat in companionable silence, watching Elias sleep, until the sound of horses in the yard signaled the arrival of Jake Morrison and Tom Colton, along with half a dozen other ranchers from the surrounding area. Clara slipped out to give Elias privacy when he woke, joining May in the kitchen where Doc Miller was already eating breakfast and planning the day. "The boy needs rest," Doc was saying firmly, "at least a week before he should even think about riding, and 2 weeks before any heavy work. That shoulder needs time to heal properly." "Good luck convincing him of that," May said dryly. "You know my brother. He'll be trying to get out of bed the moment we turn our backs." "Then don't turn your backs." Doc fixed May with a stern look. "I'm serious, May. If he tears those stitches or aggravates that concussion, he could do real damage. Keep him in bed, keep him quiet, and for God's sake, don't let him argue his way into doing something stupid." Clara found herself volunteering before she'd fully thought it through. "I could stay and help, if that would be useful. Sadie can manage the store for a few days, and you'll need an extra pair of hands with Elias laid up." May's face lit up. "Would you? That would be wonderful, Clara. I could use the help, and honestly, Elias might actually listen to you. He certainly doesn't listen to me." So it was settled. Clara sent word back to town with Tom Colton, explaining the situation to Sadie and asking for a few days away from the store. Then she threw herself into helping May with the endless work that came with running a ranch, learning as she went. The men spent the day organizing a proper hunt for the rustlers. Jake Morrison took charge, coordinating with the other ranchers to set up a rotating watch system and plan systematic searches of the surrounding territory. They found evidence of a camp about 10 miles north, cold fire pits, empty whiskey bottles, tracks leading away toward the mountains. The rustlers had fled after shooting Elias, but Jake was determined they wouldn't get away with it. "We'll find them," he promised May grimly. "And when we do, they'll answer for what they did." Inside the house, Claire discovered that May hadn't been exaggerating about Elias's stubbornness. He woke around mid-morning and immediately tried to get out of bed, insisting he was fine despite the evidence to the contrary. It took both Clara and May to convince him to stay put, and even then he argued. "The cattle need checking," he protested, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder. "And the fence line on the east pasture needs repairs, and none of that matters if you're dead," Clara said sharply, pushing him back against the pillows with more force than strictly necessary. "Jake and the others have the ranch work handled. Your job right now is to heal, that's it." Elias looked at her with surprise and something that might have been admiration. You're bossy when you want to be, aren't you? I learned from the best. Clara adjusted his blankets, her touch gentler now. Sadie Chen doesn't tolerate nonsense, and neither do I. You were shot last night, Elias. Shot. You could have died. So you're going to stay in this bed and rest and let other people take care of things for once, even if I have to sit on you to keep you there. The corner of Elias's mouth twitched. That's quite an image. Don't make me prove I mean it. From the doorway, May laughed. I like her, Elias. You should definitely keep this one. Over the next few days, Clara settled into a rhythm at the ranch that felt surprisingly natural. She helped May with cooking and cleaning, learned to feed the chickens and collect eggs, and spent long hours sitting with Elias, reading to him from the worn books in the Turner Library, or simply talking about everything and nothing. The conversations during those quiet hours revealed layers to Elias that Clara hadn't seen before. He told her about growing up in Ohio, about the farm his father had lost to debt, about the decision to come west and start fresh. He told her about Sarah, not with the raw grief of early loss, but with the gentle nostalgia of someone who'd made peace with the past. She would have liked you, he said one afternoon, his voice thoughtful. Sarah. She was practical like you, smart like you. She didn't let me get away with being stubborn either. Clara looked up from the socks she was darning. Another skill May was teaching her. Does it bother you? Talking about her with me? No. Elias considered the question carefully, as he considered most things. It used to feel disloyal, thinking about caring for someone else, like I was betraying her memory. But May helped me see that Sarah wouldn't want me to be alone forever. She'd want me to be happy. And are you? Clara asked quietly. Happy. Elias's eyes met hers, warm and steady. Getting there, especially these past few months. The moment hung between them, heavy with meaning, until May's voice from the kitchen broke the spell, calling them for supper. By the fourth day, Elias was recovering well enough to be truly difficult about staying in bed. Clara found him trying to sneak out to the barn and marched him right back inside, ignoring his protests about needing to check on the new calf. Jake already checked on the calf, she informed him firmly. She's fine. Her mother's fine. Everything is fine except you, who seems determined to tear your stitches and end up right back where you started. I'm going crazy lying in bed all day, Elias complained. Then sit on the porch. You can watch what's happening without actually doing anything to hurt yourself. Clara softened her tone. Please, Elias. I know you're not used to being taken care of, but just this once, let people help you. Let me help you. Something in her voice must have reached him, because Elias stopped arguing. All right, the porch sounds good. They spent the afternoon there, Clara in a rocking chair with her mending, and Elias in the other chair, watching the ranch operate without him. Men came and went, reporting to May about the day's work. The cattle were all accounted for. The rustlers' trail had gone cold in the mountains, but patrols were continuing. Everything was running smoothly. See, Clara said, the world doesn't end just because you take a few days to heal. I'm starting to see that. Elias watched her needle flash in and out of the fabric. You're getting good at that. Mending, I mean. May's been teaching me, along with cooking and cleaning, and about 100 other things I never learned in Boston. Clara tied off a thread and examined her work critically. I'm not very good at any of it yet, but I'm learning. You're doing fine. Elias's voice was warm. Better than fine. May says you're a natural at ranch work. May's being kind. Yesterday I let the chickens out, and it took us an hour to round them all up again. Elias laughed, the sound bright and free. Everyone makes that mistake once. It's practically a rite of passage. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who are genuinely at ease with each other. Clara found herself stealing glances at Elias when she thought he wasn't looking, memorizing the way the afternoon light caught in his hair, the way his hands rested easy on the chair arms, the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth. Clara? Elias's voice broke into her thoughts. Yes? When I'm properly healed, when all this business with the rustlers is settled, I'd like to court you, properly, I mean, the way you deserve. Clara's heart did its now familiar skip. You mentioned that, while you were bleeding all over May's floors. I meant it. He turned to look at her fully. I know we've only known each other a short time. I know the circumstances aren't ideal. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Not even Sarah, and I loved her dearly. What I feel for you is different. Bigger somehow. Like everything before was just preparing me for this. Clara set down her mending with trembling hands. Elias, I'm not asking for an answer now, he said quickly. I just want you to know my intentions. When I'm well enough to do it right, I'm going to court you. I'm going to take you to dinner and dances and church socials. I'm going to introduce you properly to everyone as the woman I'm courting. And then, if you'll have me, I'm going to ask you to marry me. The words settled over Clara like a blanket, warm and safe and full of promise. I'd like that, she said softly. All of it. But Elias, you should know, I don't need grand gestures or perfect circumstances. I just need you, honest and real and exactly as you are. You deserve grand gestures anyway. Maybe. But what I want is this. Clara gestured to the porch, the ranch, the quiet afternoon stretching before them. This simplicity, this peace. You. Elias reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Then that's what I'll give you, every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. They sat like that until the sun began to set, hands linked, watching the sky turn colors that still took Clara's breath away. May found them there when she came to call them for supper, and the knowing smile on her face suggested she'd given them privacy on purpose. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jake Morrison rode in just after dawn with 3 men Clara didn't recognize, the sheriff from the next county over and 2 deputies. They'd found the rustlers camped in a box canyon 20 miles north and arrested them without incident. All 3 men were wanted for cattle theft across 3 territories. They'd be transported to the territorial prison to await trial. It's over, Jake told Elias, who'd insisted on getting out of bed to hear the news despite Clara's protests. They'll hang, most likely, or spend the next 20 years breaking rocks. Either way, they won't trouble your ranch again. The relief on Elias's face was palpable. What about the cattle they stole? Found most of them in the canyon with them. We'll spend the next few days sorting them out and returning them to their rightful owners. You lost maybe a dozen head total. Could have been much worse. After Jake and the lawmen left, Elias sank back into his chair, the tension draining from his shoulders all at once. It's really over. It is, May confirmed, her own relief evident. Thank God. Now maybe you can focus on healing instead of worrying about the ranch being attacked. With the threat of the rustlers eliminated, the atmosphere at the ranch shifted. The other ranchers still stopped by to help with work, but there was laughter now instead of grim determination. Life began to return to its normal rhythm. Clara stayed through the end of the week, unwilling to leave until she was certain Elias was truly on the mend. Doc Miller came by to check his progress and pronounced him healing well, though he still cautioned against overexertion. Elias, to everyone's surprise, actually followed the doctor's orders, content to take things slow and let others handle the heavy work. You've mellowed him, May told Clara one evening as they washed dishes together. I've never seen my brother so willing to accept help. It's actually a little unsettling. Maybe he's just tired of being stubborn. No, it's you. May dried a plate thoughtfully. You make him want to be better, to do better. He listens to you in a way he's never listened to anyone else. Even Sarah? Even Sarah. Don't get me wrong, he loved Sarah deeply. But that was different. They were young when they married, still figuring out who they were. What you and Elias have, it's a meeting of equals, 2 people who've both been through the fire and came out stronger for it. May set down the plate and turned to Clara. I'm glad he found you. I'm glad you found each other. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm glad too. I came to Red Creek expecting nothing and found everything I didn't know I needed. On Sunday, Elias declared himself well enough to drive Clara back to town. May protested, Clara protested, but Elias was adamant, and eventually they gave in. Doc Miller had cleared him for light activity, after all, and driving a wagon qualified as light activity. The ride back was different from all the others. Elias drove with one hand, the other resting on the seat between them, where Clara could easily reach it if she wanted, which she did, frequently, her fingers tangling with his as they talked about the week, about the ranch, about the future. I'll miss seeing you every day, Elias admitted as the town came into view. Got used to having you around.
You'll see me plenty. Clara squeezed his hand. May's already invited me for next Sunday's dinner. And you still come to town for supplies, don't you? I might need to come more often. Suddenly discovered I need all sorts of things from the general store. Clara laughed. Sadie's going to figure out your excuses eventually.
Sadie already knows. The whole town knows, probably. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the store. I don't care who knows, Clara. I'm proud to be courting you. Want everyone to know it. Before Clara could respond, Sadie emerged from the store, her arms crossed and her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. About time you brought her back, Sadie called. Store's been a mess without her, though I'm glad to see you're still alive, Turner. Town was worried. Takes more than a bullet to kill me, Elias said, climbing down from the wagon with only a slight wince. He came around to help Clara down, his hands at her waist, and for just a moment they stood close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. For finding me that first day, for being kind when you didn't have to be, for seeing me as more than just the rejected bride. Thank you, Elias replied just as quietly, for staying, for not giving up on Red Creek, for giving me a reason to hope again. He kissed her then, right there on the main street where anyone could see, a gentle kiss that promised 1,000 more to come. When they pulled apart, Clara was vaguely aware of Sadie making a triumphant noise from the doorway, but she couldn't bring herself to care about the audience. I'll see you soon, Elias promised. You better. Clara watched him drive away, then turned to face Sadie's knowing grin. Don't say it, Clara warned. Say what? That I called it from the first day? That I knew you two were perfect for each other the moment I saw him carry your trunk? Sadie's grin widened. Fine, I won't say it, but I'm thinking it real loud. The next few weeks brought a sweetness to Clara's life that she'd never experienced before. Elias came to town 3 times a week, always with some excuse about supplies or business, and always staying longer than necessary to talk with Clara. On Sundays, he drove her to the ranch for dinner with May, and afterward they'd sit on the porch or walk the property while Elias showed her every corner of the land he loved. Red Creek's attitude toward Clara began to shift as well. She was no longer just the rejected mail-order bride or Sadie's charity case. She was the woman Elias Turner was courting, which gave her a certain status in the community. More than that, though, she'd proven herself through hard work and genuine kindness, and the townspeople recognized it. Mrs. Patterson started coming to the store specifically to chat with Clara about preserves and recipes. Reverend Matthew's wife invited her to join the ladies' sewing circle. Even some of the women who'd been coldest to her initially began to warm up, offering tentative smiles and polite conversation. The only holdout was Constance Pike, who still swept past Clara without acknowledgement whenever their paths crossed. But Clara found she didn't care. Constance Pike's opinion mattered less and less with each passing day. November gave way to December, bringing cold weather and occasional snow that dusted the mountains white. Clara had never experienced a Western winter before, and she found both the beauty and the harshness of it exhilarating. The sky seemed bigger here, the stars brighter, everything more vivid and alive than anything she'd known in Boston. 2 weeks before Christmas, Elias came to town with May and announced they were taking Clara Christmas shopping. Clara protested that she had everything she needed, but May wouldn't hear of it. It's tradition, May insisted. We always go to the next town over for Christmas shopping. It's bigger than Red Creek and has better selection. Besides, it'll be fun. When's the last time you did something just for fun? Clara couldn't remember, so she agreed. They spent the day browsing shops in Copper Falls, a town about twice the size of Red Creek with actual sidewalks and streetlights. May bought fabric for a new dress. Elias purchased tools and supplies, and Clara found a beautiful shawl for May and a pocket watch chain for Elias that she could just barely afford. They had dinner at a real restaurant, Clara's first restaurant meal since arriving in Wyoming. And then Elias drove them home through the darkness, May dozing in the back of the wagon while Clara sat up front beside him. Did you have a good day? Elias asked quietly. The best day, Clara confirmed. Thank you for including me. You're family now. Of course we included you. The word family settled into Clara's heart and made itself at home. Family. She'd been alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to belong to something bigger than herself. Elias? she said softly, not wanting to wake May. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you said you were going to court me properly, how long did you imagine that would take?" "Before you asked the other question, I mean." She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. "I was thinking maybe until spring. Give us time to know each other better. Let the town get used to the idea. Do things right." "And if I told you that felt like a very long time to wait?" Elias pulled the wagon to a gentle stop, there in the middle of the dark road with stars wheeling overhead. He turned to face Clara fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Clara Morton, are you trying to rush me toward a proposal?" "Maybe." Clara felt her cheeks flush despite the cold. "Is that terribly forward of me?" "It's perfect." Elias took both her hands in his. "You're perfect, and if you're ready to hear what I want to ask you, then spring seems like an awfully long time to wait." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "I'm ready. I don't have a ring yet. I wanted to do this right, with all the proper romance and preparation." "I don't need a ring. I just need to know what you're going to ask." Elias laughed softly, then sobered, his eyes intense on hers. "All right then. Clara, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubbornness. I love the way you see the world, the way you've built a life here from nothing. I love that you're brave enough to take chances and soft enough to care deeply. You make me better just by being near you." He paused, took a breath, and continued. "I know I'm not perfect. I'm stubborn, and I work too much, and I'm not always good at saying what I feel. But I promise I'll spend every day trying to be the man you deserve. I'll protect you and provide for you and stand beside you through whatever comes. I'll make you laugh and hold you when you cry and never, ever let you doubt how much you're loved." Clara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "So here's my question. Even though I don't have a ring, and we're sitting in a wagon in the middle of a dark road, and this is nothing like I planned, Clara Morton, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life showing you what it means to be truly cherished?" "Yes." The word came out as a whisper, then stronger. "Yes, Elias. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. From the back of the wagon, May's voice came through the darkness. "About damn time! I was starting to think I'd have to propose for him." They all dissolved into laughter, the sound carrying across the empty prairie like joy made audible. Elias got the wagon moving again, but this time his arm was around Clara's shoulders, holding her close against the cold. She leaned into his warmth, her hand resting over his heart, and thought about how far she'd come from that terrible day on the train platform. She'd come to Red Creek broken and rejected, with nothing but a trunk full of worn dresses and a heart full of fear. But she'd found work that gave her purpose, friends who became family, and a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible. The rejected bride had found her home. And more than that, she'd found herself. The news of their engagement spread through Red Creek faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time they returned to town the next morning, it seemed like everyone already knew. Sadie greeted Clara with a bone-crushing hug that left her breathless, declaring she'd known it would happen from the very beginning. Reverend Matthews offered his congratulations and his church for the ceremony. Even the usually taciturn blacksmith grinned and told Elias he was a lucky man. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Constance Pike's expression when she heard the news could have curdled milk, and she made a point of loudly wondering what kind of woman trapped a decent man so quickly after being rejected by another. But her venom had lost its sting. Clara had found something stronger than the approval of bitter old women. She'd found people who truly cared about her. "Let her talk," Sadie said dismissively when Clara mentioned Mrs. Pike's reaction. "Constance has been miserable for 30 years and wants everyone else to be miserable too. Pay her no mind." Clara tried to follow that advice, throwing herself into wedding preparations with May's enthusiastic help. They decided on New Year's Day for the ceremony, just 3 weeks away, but neither Clara nor Elias saw any reason to wait longer. They'd both waited long enough for happiness. The weeks before Christmas passed in a blur of planning and preparation. May insisted on making Clara's wedding dress, spending hours measuring and pinning and stitching while Clara stood still as a statue and tried not to cry at the generosity of it all. The fabric was a soft cream wool that May had been saving for years, waiting for the right occasion. "I bought this thinking I might use it for my own wedding someday," May confessed one evening as she worked on the hem. "But I think I was really saving it for you, for the sister I always wanted and finally found." Clara did cry then, and May joined her, both of them laughing through their tears at the absurdity of crying over a dress. Elias came to town almost daily now, always finding excuses to see Clara, even though the whole town knew the real reason. They took walks when the weather permitted, bundled against the December cold, talking about their future, where they would live. The ranch, of course. Clara had already fallen in love with it. Whether they wanted children, yes, though Elias was cautious about the topic given what had happened to Sarah. What kind of life they wanted to build together, something simple and honest, full of hard work and harder-earned joy. "I want to expand the herd next spring," Elias told her one afternoon as they walked through the snow-dusted streets. "Maybe add some horses too. There's good money in breaking horses for the cavalry if you know what you're doing." "Do you know what you're doing?" Clara asked, smiling up at him. "I'm learning." "Same as everything else." He squeezed her hand. "We'll learn together." The idea of learning together, of building something from the ground up as partners, filled Clara with a contentment she'd never known. This was what marriage should be, not a transaction or an arrangement, but a true partnership between equals. Christmas came with clear skies and bitter cold. Clara spent Christmas Eve at the ranch, helping May prepare a feast while Elias pretended to work, but mostly just got in their way. They ate by candlelight, the three of them around the big kitchen table, and Clara thought about how much had changed since that first terrible day in Red Creek. After dinner, Elias presented Clara with a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns. "I made it," he said, almost shyly. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something from me for Christmas." Inside the box was a ring, simple gold with a small diamond that caught the lamplight and threw tiny rainbows across the table. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Elias, it's beautiful, but you didn't have to—" "I wanted to." He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. "I know I proposed without a ring, in a wagon, in the middle of nowhere. But I wanted you to have this. Wanted everyone to see that you're spoken for, that you're mine, and I'm yours." Clara threw her arms around his neck, not caring that May was watching with a huge grin. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too," Elias murmured into her hair. "More than I thought possible." May gave Clara her gift next, a beautiful shawl she'd knitted herself in a soft blue that matched Clara's eyes. And Clara gave them the gifts she'd bought in Copper Falls, feeling inadequate compared to their thoughtfulness, but pleased when both Elias and May seemed genuinely delighted. They sat by the fire long into the night, talking and laughing and planning for the wedding. It was the best Christmas Clara had ever had, better even than the ones from her childhood when her parents were still alive and the world seemed full of possibility. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought a flurry of final preparations. The dress was finished, beautiful and elegant in its simplicity. Reverend Matthews met with Clara and Elias to discuss the ceremony. Sadie closed the store for New Year's Day so everyone could attend the wedding. May worked herself into a frenzy, making sure everything would be perfect. 2 days before the wedding, Clara was helping Sadie inventory stock when the bell above the door chimed and Alden Pike walked in. Clara's hand stilled on the ledger she'd been writing in, her heart suddenly pounding. She hadn't seen Pike since that first awful day, though she'd heard he'd been away on business for most of the fall. "Miss Morton?" he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Clara glanced at Sadie, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod, then followed Pike to a quiet corner of the store. Up close she could see that he looked different, older somehow, with new lines around his eyes and mouth. "I heard you're getting married," Pike said without preamble. "To Elias Turner." "I am." Clara lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "On New Year's Day." "I also heard about what happened with the rustlers, that Turner was shot protecting his land." "He was. But he's recovered fully now." Pike was silent for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then, to Clara's complete shock, he said, "I owe you an apology." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "An apology." for how I treated you when you arrived. It was ungentlemanly and cruel, and I'm ashamed of it." The words seemed to cost him something to say. I'd convinced myself I knew exactly what I wanted in a wife. Someone beautiful and perfect who would be an ornament to my life. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've become part of this community, how you work hard and treat everyone with kindness, I realized I was a fool. Clara didn't know what to say. This was the last thing she'd expected. "You would have made me a good wife," Pike continued. "Better than I deserved, certainly, and I threw that away because I was too shallow to see past surface appearances. Turner's a lucky man. I hope he knows that." "He does," Clara said quietly. "And Mr. Pike, thank you. For the apology, I won't pretend what you did didn't hurt, because it did. Terribly. But I've also come to see that it was a blessing in disguise. If you'd married me, I never would have found Elias. Never would have discovered that I could be loved for exactly who I am, flaws and all." Pike managed a small smile. "Then perhaps my cruelty served some purpose after all. I wish you happiness, Miss Morton. You deserve it." He left then, and Clara stood there feeling oddly lighter, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. Sadie appeared at her elbow, eyes shrewd. "That took guts," Sadie observed, "coming in here to apologize. Maybe there's hope for him yet." "Maybe," Clara agreed, "but I'm glad I'm marrying Elias instead." Sadie laughed. "Amen to that." The night before the wedding, May insisted Clara stay at the ranch. It was tradition, she said, for the bride to prepare at the groom's home. Besides, May wanted one last night to fuss over Clara before she officially became her sister-in-law. They stayed up late, May helping Clara wash and style her hair, both of them talking about everything and nothing. Finally, as midnight approached, May grew serious. "I want you to know something," she said, brushing out Clara's long brown hair. "When Sarah died, I thought Elias would never recover. He loved her so much, and losing her and the baby broke something in him. He went through the motions of living, but there was no joy in it, no light." May set down the brush and met Clara's eyes in the mirror. "Then you came along, and slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice at first that light came back. He started smiling again, started hoping again. You gave him back his life, Clara. You gave me back my brother. I can never thank you enough for that." Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "He gave me back my life too. When I got off that train and Pike rejected me, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd made a terrible mistake coming west, that I'd be alone and unwanted forever. But Elias saw me, really saw me. Not my crooked shoulder or my spectacles or my lack of prospects, just me. And he chose me anyway. He chose well." May hugged her fiercely. "You both did. Now get some sleep. You've got a wedding tomorrow." But sleep was impossible. Clara lay in the guest room, soon to be her sewing room, she and Elias had decided, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every hardship, every moment of fear and desperation had led to this, to tomorrow, to Elias, to a future that was nothing like what she'd planned but everything she'd never dared to hope for. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara woke to find May already up and making breakfast, humming cheerfully as she worked. Elias had spent the night at a neighbor's ranch, another tradition May insisted on, and wouldn't return until it was time to go to the church. The morning passed in a haze of preparation. May helped Clara into the cream wool dress, fastening the dozens of tiny buttons that ran up the back. She arranged Clara's hair in a soft style that framed her face, weaving in sprigs of winter greenery May had collected. She fussed and adjusted and declared Clara the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen. When Clara looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. The shadows that had haunted her eyes for so long were gone, replaced by a brightness that seemed to come from within. "Ready?" May asked softly. More than ready. They arrived at the church to find it packed with people, seemingly the entire town of Red Creek and half the surrounding ranches besides. Clara felt a flutter of nerves as May led her to the small room where brides waited, but it was quickly replaced by excitement. In just a few minutes, she would walk down that aisle and marry Elias Turner. Nothing else mattered. Sadie appeared in the doorway dressed in her finest and grinning from ear to ear.
You look perfect, she declared. Elias is going to fall over when he sees you. Is he nervous? Clara asked. Terrified from the look of him, but happy. So happy, Clara. You should see his face. Sadie's expression softened. I'm proud of you, girl. You came here with nothing and built yourself a whole new life. That takes courage most people don't have. Clara hugged her, this gruff woman who'd given her a chance when she had nowhere else to turn. Thank you, Sadie, for everything. Stop that or you'll make me cry, and I don't cry. But Sadie's eyes were suspiciously bright when she pulled away. Now, they're ready for you. May's going to walk you down the aisle since you don't have family here. That all right with you? It's perfect. May took Clara's arm, squeezing gently. Let's go make you a married woman. The church doors opened and Clara got her first glimpse of the gathered crowd. Every pew was full, faces she'd come to know over the past months, all turned toward her with smiles. But Clara barely saw them. Her eyes found Elias standing at the altar with Reverend Matthews, and the rest of the world faded away. He was wearing his best suit, his hair neatly combed, and the expression on his face when he saw her was everything May and Sadie had promised. Wonder and joy and love so intense it took Clara's breath away. The walk down the aisle seemed to take forever and no time at all. Then May was placing Clara's hand in Elias's and stepping back, and they were standing together before God and the community, ready to pledge their lives to each other. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage and the responsibilities it entailed. But Clara barely heard him. She was too focused on Elias, on the way his hand held hers so carefully, on the slight tremble in his fingers that told her he was as overwhelmed by this moment as she was. Then it was time for the vows, and Elias turned to face her fully, his voice steady and clear as he spoke. I, Elias Turner, take you, Clara Morton, to be my wife. I promise to love you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. I promise to honor you and cherish you, to protect you and provide for you, to be your partner and your friend for all the days of my life. You came into my life when I'd given up on happiness, and you showed me what it means to hope again. I will spend every day proving myself worthy of the gift you've given me. Clara's voice shook as she repeated her own vows, promising to love and honor Elias, to stand beside him through whatever came, to build a life together based on trust and respect and devotion. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't care. These were happy tears, joyful tears. When Reverend Matthews finally pronounced them man and wife and told Elias he could kiss his bride, Elias pulled Clara close and kissed her with such tenderness and passion that the church erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Turner, Elias whispered against her lips. My wife. My husband, Clara whispered back, testing out the words and finding them perfect. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, grinning like fools while their friends and neighbors showered them with rice and good wishes. Outside, the winter sun was brilliant on the snow, making everything sparkle like diamonds. The celebration moved to the church hall, where tables had been set up with food and drink donated by half the town. There was music and dancing and endless toasts to the happy couple. Clara danced with Elias, with May, with Sadie, with half a dozen ranchers and townsmen who wanted to congratulate the bride. Her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling, but she'd never been happier. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself standing by the window watching the celebration, momentarily alone. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 4 months ago, frightened, rejected, certain her life was over. That woman had been so focused on what she'd lost that she couldn't see what she might gain. You all right? Elias appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. Better than all right. I was just thinking about how much has changed since I arrived. Everything's changed, Elias agreed, for both of us. You know what today is, besides our wedding day? New Year's Day. Exactly. A new year, a new beginning. Seems fitting. He turned her to face him, his eyes serious. I meant every word I said in those vows, Clara. You gave me back my life, my heart. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. Clara reached up to touch his face, marveling that she was allowed to do this now, that this incredible man was hers. You saved me, Elias. Not just that first day when you lifted my trunk and protected my dignity. Every day since then.
You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Then we saved each other, Elias said simply, and we'll keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives. They kissed again, long and sweet, unmindful of the knowing looks and soft laughter from their guests. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, it was time to leave. Elias had the wagon ready, loaded with Clara's trunk, the same trunk he'd carried that first day, and her few other possessions. They were going home to the ranch to begin their life together as husband and wife. The drive through the twilight was peaceful, both of them content in comfortable silence after the excitement of the day. The mountains loomed dark against the colorful sky, the same mountains Clara had seen her first day in Wyoming. They'd seemed so forbidding then, so harsh and unforgiving. Now, they just looked beautiful. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked as they neared the ranch. "That I'm glad Alden Pike rejected me," Clara said honestly. "If he hadn't, I never would have found this. Found you. Found home." Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in the ranch yard and turned to her, his expression tender in the fading light. "This has always been your home, Clara. From the moment I saw you sitting on that platform, something in me recognized you. Knew you belonged here. Belonged with me." "Do you believe in fate?" Clara asked. "That things happen for a reason?" "I believe we make our own fate by the choices we make. You chose to stay in Red Creek when you could have gone back east. You chose to work hard and build a life here. You chose to give me a chance when you could have closed your heart." He kissed her softly. "And I chose to see you, really see you, instead of looking past you like Pike did. We made those choices, Clara, and they led us here." May had thoughtfully made herself scarce for the evening, leaving a note saying she was staying with a neighbor to give the newlyweds privacy. The house was quiet and warm, the fire already laid and waiting to be lit. Elias carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, then set her down gently in the center of the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," he said softly. Clara looked around at the house that was now hers, the sturdy furniture, the braided rugs, the curtains at the windows. It wasn't fancy or elegant. It wasn't anything like what she'd imagined her married life would be when she'd left Boston all those months ago. It was better. So much better. "Home," she repeated, the words settling into her heart with perfect certainty. "That's exactly what this is." Later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Clara thought about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. Every rejection, every hardship, every moment of fear and doubt had been necessary. They'd shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for this life and this love. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Elias stirred beside her. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me your wife." "Thank you for the same." He pulled her closer, his warmth surrounding her. "I was so lost before you came, Clara. I didn't even realize how lost I was until you showed me what it meant to be found." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering the ranch in a blanket of white. The new year had begun, bringing with it the promise of new life, new joy, new possibilities. In the months that followed, Clara would learn even more about ranch life. She'd discover she had a natural way with horses, that her careful accounting skills made her invaluable in managing the ranch's finances, that she was stronger than she'd ever given herself credit for. She and Elias would work side by side through long days and longer nights, building their herd and their home and their future together. May would become not just a sister-in-law, but a true sister, the family Clara had lost when her mother died. The three of them would form a unit that worked together seamlessly, each supporting the others through challenges and celebrating victories together. Red Creek would become truly home, the suspicious stares replaced by genuine welcome. Clara would join the ladies' sewing circle and help at church socials and become known as someone reliable and kind, not as the rejected mail-order bride, but simply as Mrs. Turner, valued member of the community. And on a warm spring day just over a year after their wedding, Clara would tell Elias that they were expecting a child. The fear would be there, memories of Sarah making them both cautious, but so would hope. And when their daughter was born healthy and strong the following winter, Elias would hold both his wife and his child and cry tears of joy and relief. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this first night of their marriage, Clara was content to simply be, to lie in the arms of the man who loved her, in the house that was now her home, at peace in a way she'd never been before. She had come to Red Creek expecting nothing and found everything, had been rejected and abandoned, only to be chosen and cherished, had lost herself completely, only to be found by the one person who truly saw her. The mail-order bride who'd been returned at the station had become Elias Turner's beloved wife. And as Clara drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes you had to be broken before you could be made whole. Sometimes rejection was really just redirection towards something infinitely better. Sometimes the end of one dream was just the beginning of another, truer, more beautiful dream. And this dream, this life with Elias, this home in Wyoming, this love that had grown from the ashes of humiliation, this was the truest, most beautiful dream of all. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence and possibility. Inside, two hearts beat as one, united in love and hope and the unshakable certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along. The story that had begun with rejection and despair had ended in joy and belonging. Clara Morton Turner had finally, truly come home.